Here we go, Part-Time Hero. And this is a live presentation, not canned. So without further ado, I'm going to invite the group to share their screen if they wish. And
all right,
just the presentation.
All right.
Hello. All right. Hello, everyone. This is our MQP game, WPI Part-Time Hero. It's a game to teach children about computer science concepts. I'm Oliver.
I'm Alex.
I'm Haley.
Javier Marcos.
I'm Linda Pusey.
All right, so we had a couple of objectives going into this project, and the first thing we want to tackle is making it important for children to understand the technology they use every day as it becomes increasingly more important to society. And it's also important to get children invested and interested in the topic of computer science and better understand the field in the future. And what we also want to do is prevent anxiety within children when it comes to math, such as not being able to do certain math concepts. And also we want to make CS more available towards more people, especially girls who are underrepresented in this field. So our game was made in Unity, and it targets children 7 to 9. And the goal of the game is you go from place to place as the goat, doing superhero jobs and tasks, and each minigame teaches a different computer science topic.
So we made 5 minigames overall. Each one focuses on a different thing. So Superpower Selector here is all about Boolean Logic. You're instructed to click on specific tiles based on either the color and or the icon that's shown, a specific superpower. And on each instruction, you'd be clicking all the tiles that apply. Then you have Future Teller. This one is also about Boolean logic, but it's specifically about compound statements. You're given a huge tangled mess of ors and ands, and you must slowly chip away at it until you figure out if the whole thing is either true or false. Stop That Fire focuses on data types. You're shown a few strings of booleans and integers, and you must identify each one correctly in order to put out each fire. Quick Gig focuses on loops and recursion. You are given a few items to drag into a little box, but then what you gotta do is you set a slider to repeat the whole thing a specified number of times. And finally, you have Lightning Change, which focuses more on the math side of things. You work as a cashier, and several customers come up to you trying to buy stuff. And you have to calculate the right amount of change and hand out the money.
So in regards to testing our mini games and the game itself as a whole, we were able to do testing kind of in a continuous manner over the course of this past B and C term as we developed our game. We had 2 different focuses for testing that I'll be explaining in the next couple of slides. So our first type of testing we did at AlphaFest, which for anyone that doesn't know, AlphaFest is an annual event, a WPI that takes place in B term, in which IMGD students have the opportunity to test their games with the general WPI student body, which is what we did with WPI Part-Time Hero. And we did this for our user interface purposes, just to improve our user interface and make changes to our UI and UX based on the verbal feedback that we received during the event from participants that played our game, and also written feedback from our participants that we received from a survey we sent to them after they played our game. One example of a change we made is we added some hints and pointers to each mini game to make the games more navigable to players. And in addition to this, we were able to fix some bugs that we found from watching participants play our game. There were some edge cases that we didn't really consider that we were able to fix from this testing. So next, pretty much throughout the entire course of C-term, we focused our testing on our target audience to be able to study the actual efficacy of our game in the ability to teach or garner interest in CS concepts to children. However, before we were even able to start this testing, we had to rebuild our IRB procedures to make our protocol more appropriate for testing with children, any children under the age of 18. We were able to find in our sample study of 9 children, we conducted a remote Zoom sessions with each participant in which they shared their screen in front of us and played the game. During this study, we were able to ask their questions to gauge their interest in CS and playing games just in general before and after playing WPI Part-Time Hero. So we did this in the form of a pre and post-test survey. We asked questions such as like, do you enjoy computer science? Do you enjoy playing video games? And then afterwards, we asked these same questions to see if our game had any impact on the perspective of those their perspective of those concepts. However, unfortunately, due to our small sample size, we weren't able to make any real specific conclusions about what we were trying to prove.
So we created then a postmortem. A postmortem, for those of you who don't know, is just a document that takes into account what went right, what went wrong, and what you do in the future for a game you've just created. In our case, we created a what went right section, and we had 3 things under there: game design process, which was our way of creating the mini games. So all 5 of them were very scalable, and we could create more if we needed to and just expand upon the number of games. The artwork, which was done by an amazing artist, which we'll thank later in this presentation, and AlphaFest testing, which went smoothly, and we had lots of people show up to test our game, and we'd like to thank all of them as well. Some things that went wrong in our game in particular, and the development of it, was scoping. Many games have this issue, but it's just, we thought we could do too much in too little time. Technical difficulties in the virtual environment. We had many problems integrating the game together, which can also be shown in integration. But there are also other challenges, such as scheduling meetings and making sure we could get testing done over Zoom. Overall, it proved to be challenging, but we managed to make it through. So for future works, we suggest that perhaps a later MQP or just future work would work on more mini games for each CS topic, or for more CS topics. So if you wanted to talk about, let's say, something a little more advanced, you could. Customizable player avatar. We initially had a plan in our scope to account for like a player avatar that you could change. You could throw a little hat on your goat. We don't have that right now, but we think it would be fun to include that for younger children. Interactivity on the homepage. Right now, you just jump from one point to another on the map. So we were hoping you could more like walk around, think something like Club Penguin, where you literally just click to walk. And then one last thing would be, we want to test more participants in order to gain results which we can analyze closer.
And we want to just give a huge thank you to our advisors, Professor DeWinter and Professor Smith, for helping us with this MQP. And we also want to thank our artist, Christian, who did a great job with all the art assets for our game. We also want to thank all of our testing participants. It was a great help, and we know it's very wonderful that they're able to give their time to help us with the game. And we just want to thank everyone for watching our presentation. If you have any questions, please let us know. But yeah.
Okay. Questions for this team?
I have a couple questions. So cool. I'm super into computer science education for young kids. Nice to see this project topic. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you picked the specific topic areas that you did, especially for this age group, or if there are any like resources like the Computer Science Teacher Association standards or the Massachusetts teaching standards for this age group that you found either helpful or not as you were picking the game concept?
Well, so technology is becoming more ingrained in our lives by the day. So we think it's important to introduce more people into this area so we can cover that demand. So that's why what we plan to do was let children dip their toes into that topic so they can become more accustomed to that and be more confident in it later on, especially with girls, since currently computer science is predominantly represented by males.
Right. So sorry, let me clarify the question. Sorry. So I buy into the like overall argument for why you need it. I guess more like why Boolean logic as opposed to like problem decomposition or like some of the K through 2 standards in CSTA are like how passwords work and things like that. So what made you pick like Boolean logic type stuff?
Well, part of that was we were trying to come up with mini games that could better show that, and we planned to make more mini games at first, covering more complicated things, but we had to dial those back. We didn't have the time.
Yeah, we would rather have 5 really good mini games than 10 really like half-done mini games.
Basically.
Yeah, and it had to be simpler. It was better. So like we were thinking about like object-oriented programming for a game, but then it was like a lot of these kids don't even know the basis of computer science. Like one of the testing groups, they looked at the game and it said find the string, and they were so confused because there was no string on the board and they thought the game was broken. And I was like, no, like the string is not like a piece of like rope. It's like a word, and then they learned from it and they were like really interested afterwards. And it was just,
I think what it came down to for choosing the topics was when we were learning computer science, like what were things we wish we knew? And a lot of that was like Booleans, like what the heck is a Boolean? What is a string? What is a data type? And then we came up with ideas for different mini games, for different topics, so it helped introduce those. And we did different research on those thanks to our advisors.
Cool, thank you.
Time for some more questions, maybe 1 or 2.
I have one. Where were you able to get children from, and why didn't you make a call out to more faculty? Because I had 2 kids who could have used like an hour to do something at some point. And is this going to be available so that I could at least take advantage of it during the summer?
I was able to actually find 1 faculty member who had 2 children. Being that I was an older person, they were pretty like terrified that I walked in. So I was only able to test 1 of them because 1 of them was a little too nervous. But I reached out just in my neighborhood for people who had children, and then their moms were like, "Oh, I know another mom," because like I take my kid to school, and they were able to send me more and more. So I had so many like lists of people, but none of them were available for like a specific day. But yeah, in the future, it's good to contact the next group.
I think a lot of it came down to the IRB approval took a lot of our time, so we didn't have as much time to do the actual testing. So many of us had to reach out to like friends and family with children. Personally, I babysit a lot of kids, so I reached out to a lot of the parents and I was like, "Hey, would your kids be okay like with testing our game?" I can't speak for like everyone where we got all the children, but Professor DeWinter like even want us to like test with her children, even though they're a bit older in the age range and stuff like that. But I don't know if we have any plans to like make this like totally available, like, but I don't see why not. I don't know.
It is time to move on to Team Medusa, who are also live with us here in the studio audience. So I'm going to allow them to share their screen and give us their presentation.
All right, so hello everyone. We are the creators of the video game Medusa. I'm Alexis Boyle.
I'm Dalila Jarvis.
I'm Tyler Sproul.
And I'm Joy Tartaglia. Our game is a 2D role-playing game with a top-down view where you can experience the legend of Medusa from two different perspectives. You first play as the Greek hero Perseus on his quest to slay the titular character Medusa, and then you go back in time to play as Medusa to discover her background and the truth behind her transformation. The world's environment was inspired by Greek landscapes, flora, and architecture. For example, the temple's columns were inspired by the Doric order for being the earliest. Greek architecture is also known for its mosaics, which appear outside, inside, and on decorative objects.
As Medusa was initially a priestess of Athena, we put her in all white to represent purity, as a priestess who swore herself to chastity. For her cursed image, she looks mostly the same except she has snakes for hair. We wanted to show that even with her appearance, she was still a humane person, not a monster. As for Perseus, we placed him in a red tunic, on the one hand as a representation of courage, and on the other hand as a signifier of danger. And for Athena, her statue that shows up in the temple scene in the back is a pixel replica of the Athena Parthenos statue.
So why Medusa? First of all, her story is a common one. To briefly summarize, Medusa was once a priestess of Athena. One night, there was sexual activity between her and Poseidon within Athena's temple. Enraged, Athena cursed Medusa so that any who looked at her would be turned to stone. Second, we chose Medusa because of how she's depicted. These depictions range from a love-struck woman to a conniving temptress, but fail to show what Medusa truly is, a victim of sexual assault at the hands of a powerful figure. This is why we decided to make Medusa the focus of our game. Her story is well known, yet often misrepresented, a testament to the prevalence of rape culture and misogyny throughout history.
Given the high rates of sexual assault that plague our society, and given the success of other games in helping individuals think differently about a societal problem, we aim to design a game that increases empathy for a sexual assault survivor and reduces rape myth acceptance levels. We decided to utilize the story of Medusa for this purpose because she's not often portrayed as a victim of sexual assault. We hope to design our game to bring to light the influence that rape culture and rape myth acceptance has had on the tale of Medusa, as well as connect that influence with the events occurring in our society today.
As major components of rape culture, it's important to understand what rape myth acceptance and hostile sexism are. Rape myth acceptance is the acceptance and internalization of rape myths, which are stereotypical beliefs about sexual assault. One example is the belief that if a woman is raped while drunk or wearing provocative clothing, it's her fault. Next is hostile sexism, which is openly aggressive sexism. An example would be the thought that women are weak and inferior to men. But why is this important? The acceptance of rape myths damages survivors. It's estimated that only 23% of sexual assaults are reported. A factor of this could be that rape myths lead to justifications that prevent survivors from realizing they're victims. A 2015 meta-analysis of 28 studies found that around 60% of sexual assault survivors don't realize that they're victims. They simply write off their experience as bad sex or a miscommunication. Rape myths also support patriarchal systems of assault. Studies have found a strong positive correlation between an individual's intergroup dominance and their RMA scores. In light of this, we created our game Medusa in order to test the generation of empathy through perspective taking and its effects on hostile sexism and rape myth acceptance levels. Similar to how Undertale wanted to explore pacifism and violence in games, we wanted to address sexism and empathy in ours, paired with performing a study to hopefully gather some data to support our ideas.
We created a game because games have the opportunity of presenting a perspective that is different from the players. Choice-based interactivity from games draws players into the game world, which enables them to identify with characters in the game. Thus, a projective identity can be established. This happens when the player projects parts of their identity, such as their values and behaviors, onto the game character as their goals become similar. This allows the player to form a stronger emotional connection to that character. For example, in The Legend of Zelda, players play as Link, whose objective is to defeat the enemy and save his kingdom. As the player goes through the game, their motivations align with Link, and so they want him to succeed. In short, acting in the role of another person could facilitate a deeper understanding of that person in a state of active learning.
To bring to mind the themes of our game and how everything ties to this pervasive problem throughout history to modern day, we included this article montage at the end of the game. This placement was so that participants will be actively considering themes portrayed within the game in the real world. We've tested 3 different versions of our game. The first was our paper prototype, a conceptual form of our game that allowed us to evaluate our themes and story. It was drawn with very simple art, as seen here. The second version of our game was the digital alpha, which only consisted of Medusa's gameplay. It lacked visual detail and animations, and it was meant to test player reactions to an improved narrative based on feedback from the prototype on character dialogue. Finally, there was the full game, which featured more detailed art, character animations, and combat mechanics. Here we tested the gameplay, the story in its entirety, and it was the version used in our study.
Beyond understanding how people were playing the game, we also wanted to see whether playing the game could affect empathy felt towards Medusa, rape myth acceptance levels, and hostile sexism levels. So for our research question, we asked, will playing the full game Medusa lead to more increased empathy towards Medusa and more significant reductions in rape myth acceptance and hostile sexism than playing the shortened version of Medusa will?
To test this, we set up an experiment utilizing 2 different versions of our game. The first is a shortened version in which players only play through the game as Perseus, providing players with the classic tale of the mighty hero off to vanquish the monster Medusa. In the second version, players experience both Perseus and Medusa's side of the story. This allows the player to take Medusa's perspective and experience her story, starting before she was cursed and ending with Perseus defeating her. These 2 versions were randomly assigned and utilized to see if the different perspective-taking experiences changed any results within our study. Players were not made aware of the multiple versions until reading the debriefing form at the very end of our study.
For our study, we had 3 dependent variables we were looking for changes in, and 3 different scales to measure these variables. To measure empathy felt towards Medusa, we used Batson's empathy scale. To measure rape myth acceptance levels, we used the rape myth acceptance scale. And to measure levels of hostile sexism, we use the ambivalent sexism inventory.
As mentioned in our research question, we hypothesized that the game version played, whether it be the full game or the shortened version as seen on the slide, will affect the participants' empathy towards Medusa as seen on the y-axis. We are happy to share that our data does support this hypothesis. As you can see, the full game has higher levels of empathy for Medusa, and this significance is supported by the error bars presented on the graph at an interval of plus or minus 1 standard error.
Our second hypothesis was that rape myth acceptance levels would decrease. As with the previous graph, the x-axis represents the 2 different game versions, and the y-axis represents the participants' rape myth acceptance levels. As can be seen, there was no significant correlation between a participant's RMA score and which version of the game they played, supported by the error bars overlapping. And for our third hypothesis that hostile sexism levels would decrease, this was also shown to be false. We found no significant correlation between which version of the game was played and participants' average hostile sexism scores.
Although our data did not support all of our hypotheses, playing our game may have placed roots of thought about sexual assault and rape within our players' minds, which may cause players to consider them differently in the future. Due to this, the data supporting our first hypothesis, and our game successfully meeting its purpose of promoting awareness and active consideration of rape culture, our project was a success. We hope that our project shares the potential that interactive media has as a tool within research, as well as inspires others to consider the potential that serious gaming has on society, as interactive media has the potential to create real change in the world, as well as being fun. And with that, we thank you all for listening to our presentation.
Amazing job, first and foremost. Question I have is sort of for the full game, was it told chronologically, or did the Medusa aspect get explored after the Perseus storyline?
All right, very good question. So the way we did the full version is the players start off with the Perseus version, same as the shortened game. And then at the end of the Perseus version, whenever they kill Medusa, as seen in the trailer, they get this kind of Medusa sees her life flash before her eyes effect, and they get transported back in time to the beginning of the Medusa gameplay, where she's a priestess and then walks through her story, meeting back at that moment where she and Perseus are in the cave together.
The main reason I ask is, do you expect, or would you think that your results would have been impacted differently had you actually told the story chronologically, where then the player is essentially forced to, undertake action against Medusa as Perseus, knowing full well the full extent of the backstory?
Absolutely. So that's a great question, and definitely one of the main considerations in our design of the order, as we agree, it definitely would be an influential factor. We had it this way not only to kind of have the parallels between the two game versions, but also so that the player is sort of left to deal with the consequences of their actions in the Perseus gameplay, rather than being forced to do something they know they don't want to. This portrays or symbolizes, I guess, the very patriarchal design within a lot of games where we don't really think about what we're doing. We just kind of go through with what the game tells us to, being the mighty hero, defeating all sorts of things. So we play off of that trope and then reveal to the players, like, there's more to this that you may not have considered, and then have them go through that. I'm kind of thinking about their actions in the first half.
Thank you.
Sure.
More questions?
I also have a question. So first off, again, great job. The presentation was great and the game looks great. I was just curious, did you guys immediately meet up and, did you already instantly know that Medusa was the myth you wanted to do? Or what was your process of deliberating and figuring out which myth best encapsulated what you guys were trying to do?
So that's also a great question. Medusa definitely, it wasn't just oh yeah, we're doing Medusa. We know what we want. We kind of knew that we wanted to do something social justice themed, preferably tied in with feminism. And then we just kind of brainstormed from there. And then the idea of Medusa hit us. So it was just kind of as we were brainstorming, we discovered the tale of Medusa and its portrayal and decided to go with that.
Cool. Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to this team. A little applause for them. Yes. Okay, our next team up is Interactive Cinema. This team has a pre-recorded presentation, and I'm going to start them up for you right now.
Hi, my name is Raul Arias Filippi.
I'm Brian Earl.
Hi, my name is Nikki Goldman.
My name is Jonathan Shirey. For our presentation, we will start by giving an overview of the interactive film created during the MQP. Then we will show a brief clip of the film that focuses on the interactive elements. We will then go over previous instances of interactive cinema throughout history, followed by what our goals were for interactivity in our film, and the technical aspects used to implement interactivity into the final project.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Your resume was very impressive, and we're interested in hearing what you have to say on some of these subjects. What is your stance on the environment?
It breaks my heart to see how we've negatively impacted so many habitats and lives.
Do you have any questions for me about Barotech or the position?
What happens next?
Interactivity in the world of cinema is a relatively unexplored area, so our focus for this project was to create a film with some kind of interactable elements. To achieve this, we implemented a system in which the viewer can tilt their device, in this instance their phone, to move the camera around in the film. By doing this, the viewer would be able to discover new elements in the environment, and even alter certain scenes in the film.
So now we're going to talk about cinema gimmicks. Cinema gimmicks are techniques and technologies that were added to films in an attempt to enhance the experience of watching the film. Some of these technologies were pivotal and kind of served as precursors to interactive cinema, and those are the ones we're going to be talking about specifically. So to start off, 13 Ghosts was a movie that you could watch with special ghost viewing glasses, and those glasses let you choose if you want to see the movie with ghosts or without ghosts at key scenes. So audiences could control how scary the movie was, even though this had no effect on how the story played out. Another example of interactive cinema and a cinema gimmick is the punishment from Mr. Sardonicus. The audience in this film would be given glow-in-the-dark cards with a thumbs up and a thumbs down, and at the film's climax they would vote on the fate of the titular Mr. Sardonicus. Thumbs up would mean that the character got a happy ending and was forgiven for his transgressions throughout the film, whereas a thumbs down would give him the punishment ending where he is penalized for all his misdeeds throughout the film and how he treats the other characters. Most theaters reported playing the punishment ending, and there is speculation if the good ending was even shot at all. So now we're going to talk about examples of interactive cinema as conventionally defined by scholars and most people in the field. The earliest example that we have of interactive cinema is Kino Automat in 1967. This was a film showed at the Quebec Expo in 1967, and the movie stopped at 9 points, during which a moderator appeared and asked the audience to vote on which scene played next. The other example that we have is I'm Your Man in 1992. Unlike Kino Automat, this film used controllers built into the seats for the audience to vote, and then the next scene would be played. Finally, we have Black Mirror Bandersnatch in 2018. Bandersnatch was a critical and commercial success and was controlled via either smart devices or TV remotes, as it was available on the streaming service Netflix.
We wanted to make sure that the viewers were engaged during the film. We also wanted it to be a choice. In order to do this, we had to create an interactive and non-interactive scene. An interactive scene is when the viewer is given the ability to influence the outcome based off of actions they may take. A non-interactive scene is when they are passively sitting by and watching the film. We wanted the user to be given the choice whether or not they wanted to interact with the scene. The purpose of the narrative was to convey a simple, relatable story with a satisfying conclusion and distinct characters. The story is supposed to be relatable and easy to follow. The film tells the story of Ryan Williams, a recent college graduate interviewing at Barotech, a weather instruments company. He is being interviewed by Amanda Klein, the head of human resources. We chose to represent this demographic because it is somewhat relatable to us, especially since we are looking for jobs and everyone has gone through the job hunting experience. It is also important for us to represent women in the STEM fields, specifically in positions of leadership. The film takes place in one of Barotech's offices. We wanted the setting to be modern and convey professionalism. We wanted it to look like a respectable and desirable workplace people might want to work in. The University of California, Los Angeles studied diversity in Hollywood in 2019 and 2020. Hollywood knows that diversity sells and makes money, but it is unsure if it is only casting more minorities to please a diverse audience. In the entertainment industry, many roles have been whitewashed. Whitewashing is when a white actor is seeked for roles that are meant for other races and ethnicities. According to UCLA's data, the race of lead roles by race and ethnicity from most to least in shows are white, black, multiracial, Latina, Asian, and MENA. To not misroll the characters, we got the voice actors to match the character's ethnicity. The female role is voicing an Asian American, and the model is an Asian-looking character. The male role is voicing a young, Latino from Puerto Rico and looks like their character model too. Both models are least represented in film based on the data. This is to bring more attention to these types of minorities. We also wanted both characters to not only be diverse in race and ethnicity, but in body types too.
To make our ideas a reality, we implemented the project using the Unreal Engine 4 game engine to take advantage of several of the engine's features and benefits. The engine itself has been heavily field tested, seeing wide use in both the games and film industry, so we know how powerful the engine can be. Separate code isn't needed for use on multiple platforms, as the engine will handle compiling to different platforms for us. Built in, the engine has a set of highly advanced and mature cinematic tools for us to use at our disposal. Additionally, the engine's tools are easily expandable, allowing for us to use them as a base and expand upon them for our needs. As our film is unlike anything created before, we couldn't rely on pre-existing tools to fully fulfill our vision. To achieve our goals, we created a whole new camera system within Unreal Engine 4 that runs a majority of the project by itself. Each of our cameras have definable paths they are allowed to move along. This allows filmmakers to set up dynamic camera movements while still giving the viewer control. Each camera is also easily customizable. Within Unreal Engine's Details panel, filmmakers can easily alter the variables that define how the camera behaves, such as which axis of the device's movement will affect the camera or how quickly along the path the camera moves. Using Blueprints, Unreal's visual scripting language, filmmakers can easily write code that can then be called by the camera system when conditions defined by the filmmakers are met, greatly expanding the flexibility of the system. By combining these elements, we've created a flexible and versatile camera system that fundamentally changes how film is produced, creating a whole new form of cinema in the process.
Okay, any questions for this team?
I do have one about the camera system. So I guess my question is that with the camera system and the fact that you guys did something so unique, have you guys also looked at Unreal's funding opportunities, as it could be something that more people would use going forward? What are your thoughts for the continuing development of it?
We haven't looked into that particularly. We are aware that, that, as mentioned in the presentation, Unreal has been been using more and more in the film world, with use in both live action and animated films. Currently, we are attempting to get a patent on the formula, and hopefully that could lead to potential further use in the wide cinema world.
I have a quick question. In the demographic session, you mentioned a category called MENA. Pardon my ignorance. What is that?
MENA is Lebanese Egyptian. Yeah.
So vaguely Middle Eastern or?
Middle Eastern and North Africa.
Okay, thank you. I've never heard that term used before. Other questions?
Well, I guess I do have one on the patenting. Since something like this is usually going to be a plugin, have you, how much research have you done into, are you able to get a patent? Is this something that you guys feel like you'd be able to do in Unity, Godot, or one of the other game engines as well? Because Unreal does things with work that goes through them.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So first we did some prototypes in Godot, actually, just to test the technique itself, kind of like a proof of concept before we polished it up and brought it into Unreal. So really the patent itself would be for the process of using the tilt and the camera angle itself as the methods of interactivity, as opposed to a menu or something. So that way the patent itself is not dependent on Unreal or any dependencies in Unreal. We just chose Unreal as our platform of choice, just because that was something we were kind of familiar with, and we thought that it would allow us to render and it already had some of the work there in terms of camera movement and camera tracking.
I have a question. curious. So this is cinematography heavy. I'm wondering why you decided to develop for mobile rather than a desktop, which seems to be, sort of the media of choice for most people that work with film.
We decided to move towards mobile because of it sort of being an untapped market. With how common it is for people to watch film on their phone or iPad or other devices, we just thought that it was just such an untapped market of taking the technology already present in these devices of tilting, like geolocation, cameras, all this stuff, and it's just not being used. We decided to take advantage of all the technology present and sort of double down on the idea of having it for phones.
And piggybacking off that a little bit, we also wanted to make it kind of intuitive, method of intuitive interaction that didn't depend on like menus or anything. So we figured that tilting your phone can feel a lot more natural than maybe, kind of moving your mouse around to pan the camera. So it was also just that aspect of making it kind of easy to learn and easy to get quickly.
I should point out that the system also works on PCs. You can scrub the mouse to get the tilt effect.
Well, if you're really going to develop this, suggestion, look into eye tracking maybe as a way to for the desktop version. That would be really cool and negate controls.
That's a great idea. Yes, we will definitely look into that.
Well, thank you very much for the team. I'll give them some more canned applause because I can't see. It's now 12:45, and so now, without further ado, here is the presentation of Dyadic Unity.
Hello all, I am Sarah, and we will be presenting the Dyadic Unity MQP today.
Design. Dyadic Unity is a 2D side-scrolling game with 2 implemented puzzles. The focus of the game revolves around interacting with NPCs and their dyad pair counterparts between 2 parallel worlds. Making these NPCs feel various emotions causes physical properties of the world to change, the basis of these puzzles. The team has cut out extraneous or unnecessary mechanics such as jumping, which would otherwise serve no functional purpose.
During gameplay, the player can take a few different actions. They can use the shift key to shift between 2 mirrored worlds called Order and Chaos, move around like a typical side-scroller game would, and chat with NPCs. Shown below are the player characters associated with these 2 worlds. The game has an emphasis on world state changing puzzles mixed with social interaction with the NPCs. In order to solve one of the puzzles, the player must learn how the NPCs feel about their unique situation and use it to help one of them solve their problems, thus solving the puzzle. However, the player must pick always which one of the NPCs to help in order to complete the puzzles. Now we will show you some gameplay on the next slide.
Dyadic Unity is a 2D RPG where players explore whimsical worlds and solve puzzles. One of the main features of this game is that the player can swap between 2 parallel worlds. One is a world of chaos, and the other is a world of order. Each world is inhabited by characters belonging to dyad pairs. Interacting with one half of the pair will have an impact on their counterpart on the other side. Interactions involve a complex emotional system. Player dialogue options will have an emotional tone attached to them. The NPC's new emotional state will be calculated based on weighted versions of these tone values. Additionally, this new emotional state will be affected by the NPC's prior emotional state. By interacting with NPCs and changing their emotional state, players will also impact the state of the world. New objects to collect will become available, and using these, players can solve the puzzles. We also use bubble indicators to identify interactable objects. A bubble of 3 dots indicates that an object will start a conversation, while other bubbles show the object needed to complete the puzzle. The dialogue connected to objects where you collect items from will provide a hint to where that item is used. We've also included 2 useful indicators in the top right corner. The first shows a symbol representing the NPC's current emotional state, while the second represents the area that will be found on the opposite side when you shift between worlds.
So now, when we go through the white door, the puzzles will begin being random. These random generations right now are based on arbitrary variables, and that will be changed closer to the project's deadline. It cannot be treated like a simple key and lock because you can change the state of rooms at any time, thus re-locking and unlocking different doors. It's prohibitive to breadth first or depth first search through these. The agent comes with a simple heuristic that it simply cannot undo the last move it made, and thus it does not take an arbitrary number of steps to get to the goal. Code methodology. Though we wanted procedural generation for a majority of the puzzles in the game, we had to scale back to having 1 out of the 2 currently implemented puzzles containing procedural generation. When generating an instance of this puzzle, many candidates are generated via simple heuristics. An agent then tests these candidates via iterative deepening random walks. The agent is unable to undo its last action, and thus loops are avoided in its path. It is possible that this approach misses a possible solution or finds a solution longer than the minimum solution. Nevertheless, traditional searches like BFS prove intractable within the very, very large state space of this puzzle. While testing this generation, the team used the Unity plugin Snatch to aid in the visualization of the generative space.
The art style for the game was inspired by Ori and the Will of the Wisps, which has a whimsical and mystical feel. We wanted to recreate that feeling with our game by using similar colors and a painterly style. For animating all the NPCs and some of the assets, we used Dragon Bones animation, which works through a bone rigging system similar to rigging in 3D. Dragon Bones has a direct port into Unity, so it was easy to add to our pipeline. As for producing the art assets, we used techniques for creating modular kits, including tiling assets, different detail layers, and some grayscale assets that could be recolored in-engine for auto-generated puzzles that involved color. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges for the team was the limited development time. Our original idea was scaled back from 7 pairs of NPCs to 2 pairs of NPCs, and these 2 pairs of NPCs had less realized puzzles than originally anticipated. However, we believe that despite the huge scale back, we ended up with a successful game. During gameplay, we had trouble communicating to the player how the emotional system worked and how to track it through the UI. They always seemed to connect it with something that they had to achieve and work with, however. In our earlier versions, our players had huge problems with getting lost, so we ended up adding detailed maps to aid in their navigation. Lastly, the players needed more feedback about which objects were interactable, so we added interaction bubbles to guide them.
Playtesting. We hosted multiple rounds of playtesting. Once during Alpha Fest, ad hoc testing throughout B and C term, and one last round of testing during D term. Apart from minor bugs uncovered by players, many players consistently found themselves confused about their overall progress, location, and certain mechanics. To remedy this, we made a dedicated tutorial area that the player starts out in. This tutorial walks players through each mechanic step by step to clarify each one in an isolated environment. Conclusion. Overall, players enjoyed the visual feedback and whimsicality provided by our art and world building. Iterative design on our 2 puzzles was key for making the game more player-friendly. It led to a design that eventually clarified mechanics, position, and progress to the player.
Thank you for listening. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
So after you implemented the tutorial level, were you able to get any playtesting feedback from after that?
Yes, we were. That was the point of our D-term playtesting, mostly. That was the main focus, whether or not we implemented a tutorial level that elucidated some of players' confusions on various mechanics by making them kind of do it step by step in a more isolated and linear environment.
So how did it go? Did you already get some of the information from that?
One of the big changes we noticed is that in like earlier playtests, players tended not to use the world switching feature of our game, which is one of the primary mechanics. But after testing with the tutorial, like players could use that feature a lot more frequently. Also, after the addition of the tutorial, players realized that talking to the NPCs was like necessary to change the world state to acquire items for one of our puzzles.
Right. It sounds like it had a really big impact on the game and how it's played. So that's great.
Any other questions? Don't be shy. We've got 5 minutes here.
I just have one. How did you intend the procedural generation to interact with the written part of the, like, you had some puzzles that were based around this dialogue system. How would that interact with the procedural generation side? Would you be generating dialogue for that?
So what we were going to lean into is have the dialogue state of various NPCs influence the variables working behind the scenes to procedurally generate various content in order to give it specific feels or have different objectives based on that.
Yeah, I don't have a question. I just think that an emotional game sounds where you're playing with how one thing affects another ends up being a really great idea. So really for this one, this is like one of the first times where I'm just like, oh, I'd like to like play this game, not just for fun, but to study it, see how things come together. So I think the idea of making it procedurally generated as well, I'm going to say you guys should, because we have Mass Digi now, try to work with them and make this a thing. Like, I just think that it has just a lot of different, very interesting, and I think unique ideas to the game industry.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Not so much a question, but more so a compliment that I thought the 2D visuals were really nicely implemented, and the animation system worked really well.
Thanks.
It was so cute.
I appreciate that.
Did I understand correctly that that was 2D animation?
Yes.
Bone-based 2D animation.
Do you want to talk about the software you used for it?
Yeah, I was going to ask the same thing.
Sure, yeah, I mentioned it briefly in the presentation, but I use something like called Dragon Bones animation, which has like a direct like link with Unity. So what happens is you import like a breakout sheet where you separate like each character into parts, and then you rig each of those parts with bones that kind of work like 3D, but they're on a flat plane. And then you animate within that program, and then you import it into Unity, and you can play those animations through usual implementation.
Is that a vector-based system, or does it use bitmaps, or is it a hybrid?
I believe it's a hybrid. If I actually am not completely sure.
I think on that one, like, I was really happy when I heard that part. I know that a lot of students have asked me about like 2D based rigging, but nobody's like actually just like gone out and done it. So yeah, I was really happy to see that as a tech artist. So.
Is that a Unity specific tool?
You can use it for other things as well. A lot of people use it for like making 2D animations for videos and like promotion videos, but I believe, according to their website, that it was originally created to do 2D animation for Unity, because at the time the 2D animation system inside Unity wasn't so great, so they kind of made it to fill that niche
And this is available where?
It's for free. You can actually just search it up on Google. It's called Dragon Bones Animation, and you can just download it and use it.
It's free. Oh,
yeah, it's free.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, you can get it to work with pretty much anything.
Okay, well, thank you very much to this team. Dyadic Unity. Yes, a little applause is appropriate there.